Hey guys, this is Colin the Train Fanatic, and today I'm going to be discussing my top 12 retired steam excursion stars. Let's start at number 12. Canadian Pacific number 2860. This is an H1E 464 Hudson built by the Montreal Locomotive Works in the 1940s for the Canadian Pacific Railway. Number 2860 pulls passenger trains during the Canadian Pacific Railways in the steam era. In 1956, she was retired after suffering a derailment from outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. But in 1957, she was reinstated, repaired, and put back into service for prairies in Winnipeg until she was finally withdrawn in 1959. However, she was purchased by the Western Railway Locomotive Association in 1964, who had plans to restore the locomotive. And they did. Number 2860 eventually returned to steam in 1974 and pulled a special train to Los Angeles, California as to promote the countryside of Canada, which would also include a meet with Southern Pacific 4449 in Portland, Oregon. Throughout the 1970s and into the 1990s, number 2860 had pulled excursions until she started to develop some leaks from her superheater elements, which had her sidelined for repairs. In the 2000s, number 2860 was eventually repaired and put back into service and continued her excursion career, which was probably much longer than her sister locomotive, CP number 2839. One memorable trip was that 2860 had participated in the Vancouver Steam Expo in 1986 along with several other steam locomotives. She often ran double-headed excursions with two other steam engines such as Canadian National 6060 and CP 3716. Until 2010, the British Columbia government decided to give up passenger train service, which probably put an end to 2860's career. Today, number 2860 is in the Western Heritage Railway Park in Squamish, Canada, where she still stands today. Whether or not she will return to steam, she was the first Royal Hudson locomotive to be returned to operation. Number 11. Soo Line 2719. Number 2719 is a 1923 Alco-built 462 Pacific built for the Soo Line Railroad to pull trains. This locomotive had worked on the Soo Line until she was replaced by diesels in the late 1950s. She was well known for pulling the last steam-powered passenger train on the Soo Line in 1959. It was eventually put on display in a park in Wisconsin. However, in 1996, a preservation group called the Locomotive and Tower Fund, Ltd., decided to restore the locomotive to operation. And after its aggressive restoration, in 35 minutes, the 2719 was eventually brought back to life once again. Number 2719 would eventually join Soo Line 1003 and Northern Pacific 328 on an excursion during a special event. Later on, 2719 would eventually go through several different railroads, including the Wisconsin and Southern Railroad, to pull trains again. But later on, she would wind up at the Lake Superior Railroad Museum and running on the North Shore Scenic Railroad between Two Harbors and Duluth, Minnesota. However, during her time there, her flute time was getting close to expired. But its time was extended into the summer of 2013 to continue running. During 2013, she would meet up with former Milwaukee Road 261, who was visiting Duluth that day. But pretty soon, 2719 was soon taken out of service for its repairs. Today, 2719 currently resides at the Lake Superior Railroad Museum as a display exhibit. But hopefully one day, the railroad museum she's in would have enough money to restore her to operation in the near future. So, we have not seen the last run of this mighty Pacific. Number 10. Canadian Pacific 1238 and 1286. These 462 Pacific-type locomotives were built by the Montreal Locomotive Works in 1948 to pull passenger trains between Quebec and Ontario, Canada. In their later years, they were assigned to pull freight trains after the diesels took over their passenger runs. But after being in storage, these two were restored to operation and operated on excursions in the northeastern part of the USA. One known fact that these two locomotives were actually stationary boilers to help keep a city warm after a big freeze had caused a power plant to fail. But in the 1970s, they were sold off to Jack Showalter and put back in excursion duties. At that time, Jack Showalter had the locomotives relettered to Allegheny Central, and these two engines have operated on the former Western Maryland Main Line, way before it became its own independent tourist railroad with their own locomotives. Later on, both these two Pacifics were moved to Virginia and were relettered to Virginia Central, and they operated excursions over former C&O trackage, which now owned by CSX. The locomotives were eventually relettered Virginia Central and continued to run excursions on CSX until the fall of 1993, when CSX had raised insurance costs at running steam on their tracks. But because of that, Showalter had eventually couldn't afford to keep running excursions. So apparently the steam operations had ended. And both Pacifics sat on the Shenandoah Valley Railroad in storage, after being protected by the elements with tarps covering over them. Sadly, unfortunately, Mr. Showalter had passed away, and the locomotives were left in storage for a long time. However, in 2015, these locomotives were eventually purchased by the Prairie Dog Central Railway in Winnipeg and were transported on flat cars to their new homes. Today, 1238 and 1286 are still sitting in storage on the Prairie Dog Central Railway. Whether or not these two engines will return to steam again, they have left their mark as steam excursion stars in the northeastern part of the USA. And that's the end of part 1 of my top 12 retired steam excursion stars. Stay tuned for part 2.